So on the far right, I would like to start with the lady. We have Sewa Ajiman-Boche. She's a senior director at Microsoft. She's currently based in London, but leads teams who design and implement technology solutions for global clients. Sewa, I have to say, was in Ghana for Christmas and the New Year, but she couldn't resist the temptation to come down for some African sunshine, so she's back here, and then we're happy to have her back. Next to Sewa, we have Mr. Egbert Fable Jr. He's the managing partner of Fable & Fable, an Accra-based law firm, and he's also the immediate past CEO of the Petroleum Commission, which is Ghana's regulator for the upstream petroleum sector. Thank you, Egbert. And then right next to me, we have Alex Calloway, an experienced international M&A corporate transaction legal advisor. He currently works with Accra-based law firm Ndowona & Company as UK counsel. Thank you for joining the panel, Alex. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel. I'm happy to have you. I would like to start right from energy, because I think, although he's not seated next to me, he would go that way, because I think that we need energy to even build infrastructure, and technology that will get us where we need to get to. So, Egbert, we can't achieve this kind of economic development that we are talking about without energy. Paradoxically, Africa is rich in energy resources, but we are energy poor. Paint for us this picture. What is our deficit in terms of energy infrastructure?
So let me, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Let me say that the African story is always a conundrum, as we've all, come to appreciate. Look at even our nation, Ghana, just starting from Ghana. During the era of Governor Gordon Gattisberg, he realized that independence was definitely going to come someday, and that beyond independence, we need to industrialize and improve the quality of lives of our people. So the Volta River project, the Akosombo Dam, was conceptualized, under him. And then, of course, at independence, Nkrumah, propelled it. And then by 65, we had done that. Attached to it was Valco, for example, the Volta Aluminium Company. Over the period, what have we, as Ghanaians, what have we, as successive governments, been able to do, using the Valco Akosombo Dam nexus? We all know where we are. But just back to the question you asked. Africa is made up of some 54, 55 countries, population about 1.5 billion. But if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, for example, out of this number, 600 million Africans are without access to electricity supply. And we all know what electricity does, its implications. Without quality, good, sustainable, energy, you will not be able to lead a good quality of life, even from medical care, industrialization, name them. All these, are a negative for us. And so we need to situate our issue as far as energy is concerned contextually. As far as energy is concerned broadly, we can look at the renewables and the non-renewables. So the renewable energy side, we all know, solar and all of those ones. And then, of course, the non-renewables. The non-renewables are mainly oil, gas, coal, and to an extent, uranium. Let's look at the map of Africa. Where are the oil deposits? Where are the gas deposits? And where are the coal deposits? And where are the uranium deposits? If we're able to map out all these things, we will know that a lot of these resources are in the Middle East. Oil and gas is concerned. Much as we have some very, big producers of oil and gas, Algeria, Nigeria, name them, we need to be deliberate about integration, so that where in Africa we have energy deficits because nature did not place some of these deposits there, we should fall on the ones who have, so that we'll be able to do a network. So you talk about the West Africa gas pipeline, for example. In East Africa today, Uganda is also doing a lot to send crude, through a pipeline to Tanzania and all the rest of that. These are natural factors which we cannot, mount or dismount, just easily. We have to be deliberate. And so then comes the issue of financing. Where's the money? We need to fall on foreign partners. The question is, the rest in Africa, how deep are they, and how prepared are we that these risk factors are the risk? There's political risk, first thing, and then of course other natural risk. But when I was listening to the previous panel, one thing that came up was that for those who may know, there's even a Sale of Goods Act and what have you. And then globally, the United Nations, as of 1980 to 88, introduced what is known as the UN Convention on International Sale of Goods. It will surprise you to know that a power like the UK has not signed onto it. You know why? Because long before the UN came into existence, London was viewed as the center point of global trade and trade financing. And so they have developed English law to a point where if they acquiesce to signing up to the Convention on International Sale of Goods, when people have disputes over trade, they will not go to the courts in London. And money will not be put in the British economy or in the UK economy. And they'll rather go to the UN and all of that. So you realize that as Africans, we are talking energy, we should make sure that energy goes with finance and put in place measures that will ensure that people will not be afraid to bring finance into Africa for us to work our energy resources. Otherwise, we'll just be doing this through the AfCFTA, AU, and all these things. But the real knuckle is that energy and financing move in tandem. And if you talk energy and you don't talk financing, forget it. The resources will be there, they'll be in the ground, and then you have stranded resources with the onset of the energy transition. And then the same West will tell us that, well, don't produce because you are polluting the environment. So we need to really go backstage and do something deliberate to ensure that this energy poverty in Africa ends. Thank you.
But we'll come back to you in the next round so you can talk some more about what is being done to close this gap. But before then, I would like to go to Sewa. And Sewa, on the tech side, talking about internet, access to internet. Just last year, it was reported that Africa has made significant strides in internet access, and that hundreds of millions of Africans now have access to internet. But when you look at it in terms of percentage, it's only 38% access to internet, as against the global average of about 68%. How can we rapidly increase internet access, given the importance of that to digital trade and all that, and what role can PPPs play?
So firstly, thank you, by the way, for having me here. Super delighted to be here. I really like your question, and your research, which is a great thing, aligns with mine. So roughly 2/3 of the continent is without internet access, compared with the global average of around about 2/3 being within. And so when you want to think about the why, so I always think it's good to start with the why for these things. So there are some barriers to internet access, and I know we're trying to keep on the positive, so I'll try and remain positive also. But there are some real barriers to internet access. So there's infrastructural, both hard and soft deficits that I think we should cover, and there's also around a cost. So if you look at the cost of data in Africa relative to average household income, it's very high. It's around about $3.30 or so for 1 gig of data. And compare that to global averages, say in Europe, it's around about the same sort of price. In China, in America, it's slightly higher, around about $4. And then relative incomes, you're looking at 4,000 to 5,000 per month in terms of average incomes in the West. Compare it to ours at $800 per month. So just even looking at that relativity, that in itself provides a barrier. And I must say that in some parts of Africa, like in Zimbabwe, at its highest point, 1 gig of data was somewhere around $43. So that's just prohibitive. It's unaffordable. And so if you're thinking about how do you lower the cost to ensure more a proliferation of internet access, then some of the things that PPPs can do is really think about how you invest in infrastructure. And in the last panel, we talked a lot about infrastructure investment, so bang on trend here. And the types of things you can do, like investing in fiber optics to enable widespread 4G, 5G, enables the foundation for expansion as you move forward. Another thing, of course, is going to be that interrelationship with energy. So in terms of us being electrified across Africa, I mean, electrification, to your point, I think you quoted 600 million. So at least 51% of Africa is without access to electricity. So when you put electricity alongside with affordability and reliability, these are all barriers or inhibitors, if you like, that need to be overcome. I think on top of that, there are other social factors, which again perhaps lean towards more of the softer infrastructural challenges, such as education. And that correlation between sort of education and healthcare. So thinking about our population and how you educate them to be more digitally native, if you will. I think that's really important, and starting that from very early on. And another thing I would say is actually, when you consider the internet, it's 51% written in English language. So that also within itself is an inhibitor. We have over 2,000 languages spoken here in Africa, and there are probably 5 key languages that the internet is translated in anger, at large volume. So that also can be problematic, because you'll have many learned people that perhaps are not able to access the internet or to use technology in this way because of that barrier. There are some good things coming on track. When you look at AI and where it's going, so NLP, like natural language processing, for example, is a way in which to help to accelerate the translation of internet languages into localized content. Another thing that business can do and really help with is around the content creation. You have a very innovative youth, but being able to, invest in innovation so you can start to create content that is quite specialized for local markets will also drive adoption. So it's not a single sort of answer. I think it's multifaceted, it's quite complex, but technology is certainly an accelerant in terms of helping to bridge that digital divide, if you will, and bring us quickly more towards sort of global standards over the next sort of generation or so.
Great. Interesting that you mentioned about language being a barrier to internet access. Alex, I think that your panel members have set the stage nicely for the question I'm about to ask you, which is on finance. We need financing for energy infrastructure, for the technological infrastructure that we need and all that. And I believe that this is a really big question, but I'm going to ask you to answer it in a few minutes. So I wonder how you're going to do that, actually. But what is the funding gap for infrastructure projects in Africa, and in what ways can funds be raised to achieve what we're talking about?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everybody. So I think so far the discussion has made clear the infrastructure deficit that there exists in Africa. And you're quite right that fixing that infrastructure deficit, getting these 600 million people electricity, getting internet access to the continent is going to cost a huge amount of money. It's almost tradition in panels like this to quote the AfCFTA figures of an infrastructure gap of 100 billion to 130 billion of spending that's required per year. But those figures actually come from a 2018 AfCFTA report, so I imagine the real numbers are even bigger now. So a huge need for funding. And as Honourable mentioned earlier, that funding can't come just or even mainly from government budgets. Government budgets have been hit by COVID, by Ukraine, by other economic challenges across the globe. And so that public sector money is just not there in the same way as it used to be. Even China, the Belt and Road Initiative 2022 funding was down 55% compared to previous years. And if China is struggling for money, then the rest of us are in trouble. And I don't think we can count on Donald Trump to open his wallet and fund African infrastructure. So we have to look to the private sector. But the good news, and staying positive as instructed, is that there is private sector money out there. Some estimates say there's more than $550 billion worth of funds held by investors who are focused on or primarily focused on Africa. But the challenge, and what we in this room really have to work on, and all of us who are involved in structuring investments and projects in Africa, is matching that funding with projects on the ground here that are bankable, that are sustainable, and that can deliver value for both sides of that equation in the long term. And to do that, what we need to do is understand what the risks are in Africa, understand what the risks are for PPP projects in particular, and then work out how best we can mitigate those risks. And we can't eliminate the risks. We shouldn't look at this through rose-tinted glasses, but there are structures, there are ways to minimize those risks and try and match those private sector funds that are out there with bankable projects in Africa.
Well said. We can talk about funding without risk. So you remember I told you we'll try to stay positive, but we still have to talk about these things. And we'll come back to that question on the risks that you mentioned and all that. But I'll go back to Egbert for now. Egbert, you talked about the deficits. You showed us what it is. Now, just in the last few days, I believe in Tanzania, the AFDB and the World Bank have announced they've launched this project to get energy to 300 million people by 2030. Would you say that we are on course to bridging this gap, and what role are PPPs playing in this?
Well, I wish that would have even been aiming at mission 600, so get 600 people having access to electricity. I mean, if you look at the politics of it, if you look at the governance of it, it just is not right. It just is not right that, as Africans, for whatever reason, we live in an environment where political systems have deliberately worked in such a way that oftentimes sections of the people are without access to electricity, whilst other sections are. So when you leave school, for instance, you live in a village and you go to the nearest big town for primary education and you have to trek and go back. So if you are from a part of the district where there's no electricity, a child like that is going to learn, in the night without electricity. Whereas some others, what kind of, injustice, inequality is that? And so yes, this mission 300 is good. It is said that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. And so perhaps we'll take it as is. However, it still, throws a deeper issue: management and husbanding of resources and accountability. All over Africa, you see, governance issues come up daily, and you realize that our leaders try as much as possible not to be accountable. And so, in the management and husbanding of resources, a lot of our leaders are not really accountable to the people. And so the dividends of democracy, much as they are visible and also intangible, sometimes a section of our people do not see it. We want an Africa where every child, every woman, every man, every human being, so to speak, will have access to electricity. Someone has said that perhaps it is because of where God put us that we don't value electricity. Because, you go to the West, because of their weather cycles, you will find that in winter, as you drive, into the countryside, you find that farmers are able to bring out their cattle, their sheep, their goats, and what have you, and feed them from the barns. They store. Africa, we have rain virtually like in most parts 9-10 months of the year. We have, sunshine, 9-10 months of the year. And yet, we are not able to feed ourselves. We do national budgets, and we have to ask for donor support. These are things that we need to look one another in the face and say, this has to stop. This has to stop. The fact that, you've been put in an elective position doesn't mean that you are wiser. After all, when we do beauty pageants, the women who turn up number one, are they the prettiest? No. It is just because of certain arrangements. And so we need to start asking questions. In Ghana, if you look at our constitution, for example, Article 41, I think Clause D, it talks about the duties of a citizen and the fact that we are mandated as citizens to ensure that there is no waste and destruction to public property. But we are yet to see any citizen get up and say that this thing that this minister is doing or this thing that this chief executive is doing is a waste to the public purse. And so I'm dragging them to court for the court to make a declaration that this is a waste and inimical to the economic interests of the country. These are the levels of awareness that we as Africans ought to have so that we'll be able to hold our leaders accountable. And then we'll see that dividends like electricity and what have you will just follow consequentially. For me, these are things that we should not, tarry on at all.
Great. So we've heard recently that Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and co, they're looking at how to get solar power from the Sahara Desert. So you're right. We in Africa should be asking ourselves some questions if we're here and we haven't figured out how to start doing that already. So I'm coming back to you, and that we can trade without having a single currency. A lot has been said about that. Last year, APN, for instance, did a lot to champion interoperability. How do you think that African governments and private sector can speed this up, since it's so important to what we want to achieve?
Sure, thanks. And yeah, I thought the conversation towards the end, the chap had a lot of issues that were pertinent to his context. And what struck me actually in terms of the answer, I thought, well, really he's talking about things like blockchain and other technologies that can help to secure, financial transactions and bring that traceability and also confidence to users that the technology is safe and the KYC, knowing your customer. So really interesting, and I liked the answers actually around sort of consultants perhaps being best placed to help him with some of those challenges. To answer your question around interoperability, so the challenges, and we talked a lot about them in the last section as well, harmonisation on, there's a lot of fragmentation, if you will, regulatory fragmentation, and working, nation states working together in a collaborative way to try and have simplified processes. I think one of the people in the last session talked about having the same rules to govern financial transactions. So things like that are obviously going to be really helpful. In addition to that, there are some other things. There's an investment that's required around sort of, the digital payments and making that more accessible to a broader population. So today, in terms of, sort of using or promoting digital wallets, digital payments, so people are using the technology more, then you have sort of, the opportunity from an investment perspective. When you're thinking more about investing in innovation, we've talked a lot about us as a population. We're very youthful. The average age of the African is around about 19 and a half years. I'm clearly in the ageing minority. And so on a serious note, if you think about how we can invest in innovation, so in ways in which that we can create and develop innovative solutions that are unique to the African context. So, there is a lot of technology today. So, for example, if you look at innovation globally, sort of like digital verification services, for example, great, but wouldn't it be even better if we can develop a solution rather than vanilla that is unique to our context? So the chap that's trying to, book gigs in Nigeria, he's able to, he was talking about not being able to verify people. So I think having it in a way that's suited to us by investing in innovation is a big way to continue to speed things up.
Thanks a lot. So, yeah, the good thing about our situation in Africa is that because those who have actual access to internet and to technology are quite technology savvy. So if we are able to increase this, huge. I would like to come back to Alex now on PPPs. And, you know, you spoke about funding earlier. In the earlier panel, we also heard some of the challenges raised. We don't have, although we've identified PPPs as an answer, we don't have that many in Africa, and there must be a good reason. Can you please tell us why? What are the problems? And from your perspective, what are the ways in which we can solve some of these challenges from an international legal advisor's perspective?
Sure. So again, being positive, I'll start by saying that although there are challenges to PPPs, I think there are solutions to those challenges. And so although I'm going to run through some of what I think are the bigger challenges for structuring and implementing PPPs in Africa, I think there are ways to get around those issues. To me, I think there are 4 big key issues with structuring PPPs in Africa. And I'm a lawyer, so I'll start with law as the first one. And in particular, the uncertainty and the unpredictability of the legal framework for PPPs in Africa. We used to say the problem was the fact that there weren't PPP-specific laws in jurisdictions across Africa, but that's not really the case anymore. Now there's 42 out of the 54 countries have got PPP laws. Ghana has one now since 2020. So that problem's gone. But what remains, I think, are 2 big issues from the legal front. The first is that all of those PPP frameworks are different. There's 42 different PPP laws that we need to get our heads around if we're working in this space across jurisdictions. And so all of that discussion this morning about how the AfCFTA can help harmonization and bring some of those regulatory regimes closer together, I think is incredibly helpful. And then the second issue, which I suspect will be familiar to lots of people in the room, is that often what we have on paper for these PPP regimes doesn't reflect actually what happens in practice. And that might be because there are still gaps in the framework. So in Ghana, for example, some of the implementing regulations for our PPP regime are still in draft. Some of them still don't exist yet. But it also might be because although lots of hard work and thinking has gone into the PPP regime, the rest of the legal framework doesn't match up for that. So that might be, for example, in relation to digital privacy, data protection, those laws need to catch up with modern cross-border infrastructure, digital infrastructure projects. Or one of the most common examples is tax. I worked on the Tanzania LNG project where we spent a long time thinking through that country's PPP regime and thought we had a deal that we could get over the line, only to be met by the Tanzanian Revenue Authority, who had a different view on how tax applied to PPP structures. And so sometimes there are different bits of the regulatory regime that don't work well together, and different bits of government that don't necessarily coordinate and communicate as well together as they should. So I think as well as capacity building in government, working on communication between different departments, I think would really help solve that problem. The second issue is political risk, and whether that's interference or renegotiation of contracts after you've signed them, or credit risk on the state. That can be a big problem. And there are lots of legal ways to try and manage that political risk: stabilization clauses, international arbitration, dispute resolution mechanisms. But really, I think what would be helpful for project developers to focus on more is making sure that there really is value add in their projects. Because if you can structure a project in such a way that there really is value on the government side as well as on the private sector side, and it really is a win-win project, then there's much less likely to be government interference down the line. And that might mean structuring your revenue so that some of the project revenue is tied to the benefits that you're bringing to the local community or to the population. But if you can make your projects win-win, then there's much less likely to be government interference. The third factor is finance. Everybody knows about the issues with currency exchange, currency devaluation in Ghana and in Nigeria and other African countries. And so looking at ways that you can manage that currency devaluation, whether that's through local currency revenue generation or pricing in your structures or using hedging or other financial arrangements. And then the fourth one, which I want to just focus on in particular, is the sheer cost of developing projects. And often that gets forgotten. So people talk about the need to do feasibility studies and early stage planning for their projects, and that is absolutely essential. It's a statutory obligation in Ghana's PPP Act. But that costs serious money, and it can cost $1 million more to do the feasibility work, the diligence, the environmental assessments to get a project off the ground. And so it's really great to see some of the work that the ASLF, the African Development Bank and the World Bank are doing to try and provide support for that early stage project development, because there's no point having all of these structures and investment in place for late stage projects if you haven't got the money to support that initial planning. And that initial planning really is the key to making these things successful.
Great. I know we have quite a good number of lawyers in this room, so I'm sure from the first panel and now, you know that there's significant amount of work to be done in this area. Capacity building, and also, even though the dispute resolution mechanisms, we want to make sure that we're building capacity and structuring these PPPs such that we don't get there. We have sustainable and reliable long-term PPPs, and we don't have to get to the dispute resolution mechanism. So a cue for all the lawyers in here. In order that we can bring in the audience to ask some questions before we finish the panel, I'll just ask two more questions to Egbert and Sewa, and then we'll bring in the audience. Egbert, you've worked in the public sector as a regulator, and you've spoken, I believe that's where you get the passion for all the things that need to be done. What are the measures that you believe that governments can put in place to encourage or incentivize private sector players to invest in social and economic projects in Africa?
So thank you very much, Nanadwa. I mean, it's a very important question, and I just want to say that as Africans, we need to be very clear in our minds of something. We are resource rich, but we are not liquid. Now, to be able to get to the space of working your resources to enable you become liquid and develop your people, and for that matter, our respective nations, we need to be very clear when we go out on the international market. These investors are always looking for assurances that their investments will be safe, that there will not be expropriation, there will not be nationalization. So when I was in office as Chief Executive of the Petroleum Commission, I developed a line which I used to say at various international fora seeking to attract, that we in Ghana take the position that money is a coward and will not go or stay at a place where it will not get protection. The money is a coward. It will not go to or stay at a place where it will not get protection. Now, when you get investors to realize that, so in Africa or in Ghana, when you bring your money, irrespective of whether there's a change in government or not, your investments remain safe. And Ghana has lived it. Talo, ENI, Cosmos, and the rest in the upstream oil and gas sector. We've seen successive changes in government, and investments have stayed and have grown because we don't seek to expropriate or nationalize anyone's, investments. That gives them a lot of comfort. Another thing that I think we need to make very clear, this is the era of the internet, unbridled resource nationalism. So I'll give you a specific instance in Ghana. Until 2016, when we passed the Petroleum Exploration and Production, Act 919, the previous regime, that's the previous law, PNDC Law 84, I think, did not put in there any minimum or maximum limitation with regards to participating interest when people come to Ghana to invest. So under President Kufuor, it was decided that we will do it around 10%, and that is what brought Jubilee 10 and subsequently Sankofa Jinyame fields on stream. Then resource nationalism got into our heads as Ghanaians. Hey, we must have more of the oil, we must have more of the oil. Why are we producing oil here and not refining here and all kinds of things? And then Parliament in 2016 amended the law, in fact, repealed the old law and introduced Act 919 and stated clearly that in Ghana, when you are investing and you bring your investments to work our oil and gas fields, the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, a national oil company, will be entitled to a minimum 15% participating interest. Our neighbors, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Namibia, Angola, Egypt, and the rest are hovering around 7.5, at most 10%. And then you have gone to minimum 15%. It will interest you to know that since 2016, when 919 came and said minimum 15%, only one petroleum agreement has been signed. And even with that, that was the ExxonMobil one. Even with that, they came in and realized that if you go to Guyana and we'll get it for 5%, why stay here? And so everybody is saying, oh, Ghana, we should get more oil. The problem is that unbridled resource nationalism has brought us to this situation. And so, as of the time I was leaving office, serious, proposals have been made to the Ministry of Energy that we need to come down immediately. Otherwise, the investors will look at our fiscals and see others around us and say, but if 15% is going to go waste, why don't I go to a place where I'll do only 7.5 or 10%? Lesser evil, theory. And so let us tone down on resource nationalism, yes, but let us tone down on unbridled resource nationalism because it drives away foreign investors. And we need investors. And then, of course, I also think that as Africans, we need to ensure that rule of law prevails. Because when people bring their monies and then they don't trust your courts or your judicial systems of ensuring that they get justice in the event of a dispute, they'll go to London. You pay pounds and dollars to retain lawyers there to fight for you. And then if it doesn't work, all those are gone away. So there's a lot. We need to have a very huge, and then anytime there is also, you see military interventions in Africa, you should be worried. Even if it's in one country, you should be worried because it tells a story about the entirety of Africa. Long ago, when the Soviet Union, decided to get itself dismembered, and then people from the West wanted to do investments in those areas, the Westerners realized that, look, our citizens may suffer expropriation and nationalization of investments. So they brought about the Energy Charter Treaty, which protects. I'm looking at an Africa where we also have our own version of the Energy Charter Treaty, where as far as energy investments are concerned, investors will know that if even there are safeguards with respect to their investments. Otherwise, we will be saying this, we will have the resources, the energy transition is here, is looming, and then we'll leave resources stranded and we'll not be able to improve the quality of lives of our people. So there's a lot that we as Africans can do. And I think that the time is now. And I think that across the parapet, I see that we have men and women, and even the youth who want to see a changed Africa, a change in Africa. And so for especially the youth in the audience, do not be afraid. Speak your minds, and challenge the status quo, and let us see that there is a certain turnaround from the usual way of doing things in Africa. Thank you.
Right, great, thanks. Wonderful, and for re-echoing that point that Kojo made on the first panel, we need to have the right balance. Yes, this is for Africa, it's all about Africans, but we also need to be able to make it attractive to foreigners to bring in the investment that
but also, I've talked about unbridled resources, but governments should also not be afraid. Because oftentimes when civil society and the media say, hey, the oil is for us, the gold is for us, why? They forget that we don't have the money to work it. And when people bring their monies and then you start talking unbridled resource nationalism, governments say we are going to an election. The other side is saying that they will increase our stake. So I need to toe that line. Otherwise, I'll be voted against. You understand? So we need to let opposition parties and incumbent governments know that when it comes to resources and financing, it should not be politics. It should just be the best interest of the country. If you lower it and you get your resources work, so be it, so that people will get jobs to do, technological advancements will come, and we'll be able to finance a lot of things from here.
I'm going to throw a challenge to you, Egbert. Don't let this end here. We need to keep making everybody know, the media and everyone understand that while the resources are ours and we want the best, we also have to be attractive. Africa has to be attractive and not seen as a risky place where investments would be nationalized. So please, keep on speaking that to everybody. Sewa, my last question to you. Now, we also have a huge population of unbanked and underbanked citizens. How do we use technology to bring everybody along? Because without that, same as the language barrier and all that, so we need education, capacity building and all that. Through technology, how do we get more of the unbanked and underbanked on stream so that they don't get left behind?
Thanks. Just before, I wanted to come back to you there with your final point you made around the government, etc. And for me, I think it's about the stakeholder engagement. So when you look across at some of the things that we do and our ability, to your point, we sometimes are quick to cave to the voice of the people and maybe dissenting voices. There needs to be more thought around how do you bring stakeholders together, and to your point again, it's multi-party, it's not single party, and it's about long-term vision planning, and that's maybe, and in fairness, across the world, you have that. I mean, you've got a new government in the US and there's a lot of policies that are being reversed. So it's not like it's unique to us in Africa. And staying positive, I think we should just be really cognizant of that. But at the same time, I think where perhaps we might be lacking is just being able to bring that conversation forward. And sometimes the internet, I'm a huge supporter, obviously, of technology and advancements, but sometimes it's actually to our detriment. And having the controls around like social media, perception shapes reality. And we all know how quickly a story can be thrown out into the media. It goes viral, everyone believes it's true, but actually you pull the string, there's nothing there. Now, because of technology and at its fingertips, I think we've become a bit lazy in terms of interrogating data and information, disseminating it, understanding it, and know what truth is. And there isn't enough truth in the media, and how do you verify truth in media? I know I'm slightly off topic, but I just wanted to come back because I think it's really complex in terms of the issues that you're addressing, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all, but I think that's an important part, bringing other stakeholders together. So I just wanted to add that there.
So 1 minute now.
1 minute left to speak. Okay, so the unbanked, it's about infrastructure, of course. It's about education, of course. It's about, now you're making me think fast. The unbanked, I think, the population size. I think one of the things that technology can do, where banking, there is a big gap in terms of banking access and the banking infrastructure, but that's actually to our advantage. So we are not held back, and I think in the last session they were talking a bit about payments. We are less held back by legacy infrastructure that inhibits innovation, actually. So we have the opportunity to bring our creative minds together and really innovate for a future. In the future, it's going to be 1 in every 4 person across the globe is African. So, I mean, when I consider that statistic, there's so much that we can do to get ourselves ready for, I think it's in 25 years or so, the statistic was. So there's a lot that we can do around sort of our financial footprint and having a bit more strength in terms of how we think about leveraging mobile payments, accelerating the journey on mobile payments. I mean, the work that has been done is amazing. In Kenya, they've driven 77% adoption over a period of about less than 20 years on mobile payments. So education in terms of data literacy, to understand how to use the technology better, investment in the infrastructure, the front ends that we use here, to be honest with you, are not that great. So investment in the infrastructure to make it easier, and the usuals around security, risk management. That's the best I can do in a minute.
Thank you very much. My name is Senyo. I feel a bit sad hearing about all these conversations. But my point is about PPPs and local content. So Egbert spoke very nicely about the fact that I thought that in the petroleum sector, the JV system was working so well. And then I find out that it's not working. In the mining sector, where GIPC has brought in PPPs, the regulatory environment is that you cannot do business as a foreign person in the mining support service sector. So between 2022 and now, almost all the investors have left. How do we begin to protect the investments that we attract into the country? Because we can definitely not develop without.
When you take your time, you realize that you should not do local content for the sake of protectionism. So, in the space where I used to work, what we evolved over a period was that we'll do a tier system. So there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. I mean, things like supplying water to a drill ship, that is low-hanging fruit. And then you go and then you get to a place where people can have fabrication, Ghanaians have fabrication yards and can compete with whatever that is done outside. So just a couple of years ago, a P6 manifold, multi-million-dollar thing, was fabricated here in Takoradi, and as we speak, is in the belly of the sea, producing in the Jubilee Southeast field. It's done in Ghana, first time ever. So, and it was done by a joint venture between, a foreign company and an indigenous Ghanaian company. So there are success cases. What is not good is to just, stand like a head teacher or school principal and say, I say local content before you are able to do this, do that. No. Help your people to get the capacities on their own and then deliberately introduce them and guide them into the space. So we should move away from this headmaster pupil kind of local content arrangement to empowering our people before they enter a particular industrial space. They should have a gestation period and use that to, and then most importantly also reinvest, profits they make, in the very business that they are in, rather than, just going to marry more women, buying more cars, and all the rest of things that I've seen some people do around.
Thank you. So I'm really, really sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We can't take any more questions at this time because we have the signing ceremony for, together with UPSA, and they would have to be leaving us.